Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading.
Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 7th of September 2018. Now the news that would be covered today is given on the screen and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us begin with the first article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 9. Now what this article talks about are the various features of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000. Now the first aspect that this article talks about is the purpose of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000, wherein the purpose of this act is to give effect to the Chemical Weapons Convention, or what is actually known as the Convention on the Prohibition of the Development, Production, Stockpiling and the Use of Chemical Weapons and on their destruction. Now after understanding the features of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000, we'll try to understand the basic features of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now the first feature that this article talks about of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000 is that it defines chemical weapons. Now this act defines chemical weapons as any toxic chemicals including ammunitions, devices which are specifically designed to cause death or harm. And moreover, this act also defines chemical weapons as including any equipment that is specifically designed for employing chemical weapons. The second main feature of the Chemical Weapons Act of 2000 that this article talks about is the formation of a national authority. Now the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000 empowers the central government to set up a national authority which would primarily have two main functions. Now the first main function of this national authority would be to maintain good contact with organizations that are connected with the Chemical Weapons Convention, such as the OPCW, or with state parties on matters related to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now we would learn more as to what is OPCW when we try to understand the features of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now the second main function of this national authority would be to ensure India's fulfillment of India's obligation to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now apart from this, the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000 was amended in 2010, wherein the 2010 amendment gave the central government the power to appoint any of its own officers other than those of the national authority as being enforcement officers. Now the third and the last main feature that this article highlights of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000 is of inspections. Now this act allows a national authority and the 2010 amendment allows enforcement officers of the central government to inspect, monitor, regulate persons and facilities which are either in the development or in production or transfer or use of toxic chemicals. And apart from this, the national authority is also empowered to close down any facilities which are in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention Act of 2000. So now hopefully you have understood the purpose and the features of the Chemical Weapons Act of 2000, wherein the purpose of the Chemical Weapons Act of 2000 is to give effect to the Chemical Weapons Convention, wherein this Chemical Weapons Act of 2000 defines chemical weapons, allows for the formation of a national authority to act as India's focal point to maintain effective contacts with organizations such as the OPCW and with other countries on matters related to the Chemical Weapons Convention. And apart from this, this national authority would also ensure the fulfillment of India's obligation under the Chemical Weapons Convention, wherein one of the main obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention is of inspections, wherein the national authority and designated enforcement officers of the central government are empowered to inspect, monitor, and regulate people and facilities which either develop, produce, transfer, use, or are involved in any other aspect of toxic chemicals, wherein under this act, the national authority is also empowered to close down any facilities if they are in violation of this act. So now let us understand the basic features of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now the Chemical Weapons Convention is a multilateral treaty that bans chemical weapons and requires the destruction of the chemical weapons within a specified period of time. Now the negotiations for the Chemical Weapons Convention began in 1980 in the UN Conference on Disarmament, and the Chemical Weapons Convention opened for signatures in 1993 and entered into force in 1997. Now this Chemical Weapons Convention is open to all nations. However, only Egypt, North Korea and South Sudan have not signed or ratified the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now the Chemical Weapons Convention is implemented by the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons or OPCW, wherein the main functions of the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons or OPCW is to receive the declarations from state parties which contain the detail of the chemical weapons related activities of that country. And apart from this, the OPCW also inspects and monitors the facilities of state parties and the declarations that they have sent so as to ensure that every state party is complying with the Chemical Weapons Convention. Now, apart from this, the OPCW also won the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize. So now hopefully up till here you've understood the basic features of the Chemical Weapons Convention, wherein in simple terms it is a multilateral treaty that bans chemical weapons and requires the destruction of chemical weapons within a specified period of time. And the negotiations for the Chemical Weapons Convention began in 1980 in the UN Conference on Disarmament, and the Chemical Weapons Convention entered into force in 1997. Now you should also remember that India signed the Chemical Weapons Convention in 1993. Until now, only Egypt, South Sudan, and North Korea are yet to sign or ratify this agreement. Now, another important aspect that you should remember is that the Chemical Weapons Convention is implemented by the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, and OPCW was awarded the 2013 Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the understanding of the basic features of the Chemical Weapons Convention and of OPCW is relevant with regards to your prelims examination. Now, you should understand that the Chemical Weapons Convention and OPCW have been regularly in the news from 2016 onwards. And one of the main reasons for them being in the news is because, first, the use of chemical weapons in Syria, and secondly, because of a chemical attack on an individual in the United Kingdom, which is popularly known as the Salisbury attack. And it is within this context that the Chemical Weapons Convention and OPCW have gained international importance, wherein the use of chemical weapons in Syria and the use of chemicals against an individual in the United Kingdom in the Salisbury attack both violate the principles of the Chemicals Weapon Convention and has led to the OPCW monitoring both these situations. And it is within that context that a question was asked in the prelims of 2016 with regards to the basic features of OPCW, wherein you understand that OPCW is not an organization of the European Union. And apart from this, you also understand that the OPCW does monitor the chemicals industry to prevent any new weapons from emerging. And lastly, you also understand that OPCW does provide assistance to protection to state parties against chemical weapon threats. And so the correct answer to this question would be B, 2 and 3 only. And it is within that context that the Chemical Weapons Convention becomes relevant for your prelims examination of 2019 because of the recent Salisbury attack and the conflict between the United Kingdom and Russia over the Salisbury attack. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we've taken this article from page 13. Now what this article talks about that there has been a loss of roughly around 5,000 crore in the state of Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu because of the recent flood. And these losses have been mainly caused to the plantation sector in these states. Now what we'll do with regards to this article is first understand as to what is a plantation sector. And after that, we'll try to understand what are the causes of concerns for the plantation sector due to the Kerala floods. Now, one of the aspects that is commonly said with regards to preparation for your civil service examination is to first completely read and understand the NCERT books. So what we'll do with regards to the first aspect is try to understand what is a plantation sector from the help of the NCERT books. Now we have taken chapter 4 from the social studies book of class 8 NCERT. Now according to this book, plantations are a type of commercial farming where a single crop of either tea, coffee, sugarcane, cashew, rubber, banana or cotton are grown. And according to this book, in plantation farming, large amount of labor and capital are required, wherein the produce produced in plantation farming such as rubber, tea, coffee and others is either processed on the farm itself or in a nearby factory, and because of this, the development of a transport network is therefore essential for plantation farming. Now major plantations are found in the tropical regions such as rubber in Malaysia, coffee in Brazil, tea in India, where in this image you can see a banana plantation. Now apart from this, we have taken this chapter 5 from the book Human Geography in class 12th NCERT. Now what this book tells us is that the Europeans colonized many parts of the world and they introduced a form of agriculture known as plantation agriculture. And this plantation agriculture for the Europeans was mainly profit oriented and included large scale production systems. And this plantation agriculture was introduced by the Europeans in their colonies which were situated in the tropics. Now as we also understood in the class 8th book also, that most of the plantation agriculture is followed in the tropical region. And some of the important plantation crops are tea, coffee, cocoa, rubber, cotton, oil palm, sugarcane, bananas, and pineapples. Now, further, this book highlights basic features of plantation agriculture, wherein first, they consist of large estates or plantation, and secondly, they require large capital investment and technical support. Thirdly, plantation agriculture also uses scientific methods of cultivation. The fourth main feature of plantation agriculture is that it uses a single crop specialization. And lastly, plantation agriculture uses cheap labor and has a good system of transportation, which was also said in the Class 8th NCERT book, that it requires a good system of transportation to link the estate or the farms to the factories. Now, the Class 12th NCERT book also contains a question as to which one of the following is not a plantation crop, wherein the four options are coffee, wheat, sugarcane, and rubber. Wherein the explanation from this section, you would understand that wheat is not a plantation crop because it is not a cash crop but a food crop. And apart from this, the book also contains a question which you can try to solve for your mains examination, wherein the question asks discuss the important characteristic features of plantation agriculture. Name a few important plantation crops from different countries. Now, with regards to your civil service examination syllabus, first, with regards to your prelims examination, plantation agriculture would be placed in Indian and world geography. And secondly, with regards to your mains examination, plantation agriculture would first be placed in GS paper 1 within the section Geography of India and the World. And secondly, it would also be placed in GS paper 3 within the section Economic Development and within the subsection Major Crops Cropping Patterns in various parts of India. And similarly, in the transportation of agriculture produce, issues and related constraints. So now hopefully you've understood as to what is plantation agriculture with the help of the NCERT books. Now let us understand the second aspect of the article. Now let us understand the second aspect as to what are the causes of losses to the plantation sector due to the recent Kerala floods. Now the article has given four reasons for the losses to the plantation sector. Now the first reason given in the article is that there has been a loss of cultivation land due to landslips. Now if you take a look at this image, landslips are generally a form of landslides but occur on a very large area. And because of the recent floods in Kerala, there has been a loss of cultivation land due to landslips. As most of the plantation sector, such as for tea and coffee, generally lie on the slopes of the Western Ghats. And because of the heavy rains and flooding, there has been heavy landslips within these regions. The second reason given in the article is the warehouse losses due to pest and fungi attacks, wherein the produce from the plantation sector such as of tea or coffee that have been kept in warehouses have been deteriorating due to pest and fungi attacks. The third reason given in the article is that there is a lack of the required sunlight due to the rainy weather. Now, because of the rainy weather in Kerala and in regions of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, there has been a lack of required sunlight for tea plantation. And the fourth and the last reason given in the article is the losses to the coffee plantation due to berry dropping. Now, what you see in the image are coffee seeds, but because of heavy rain, these coffee seeds fell on the ground or either were affected by fungi and therefore cannot be used for harvesting. And because of this, there was a loss to the coffee plantation sector in the state of Kerala due to berry dropping. So now hopefully you've understood the four reasons given in the article for the reasons of losses to the plantation sector in Kerala and in regions of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Now a question for your practice is consider the following statements on plantation agriculture, and what you can do is give the correct answer to this question in the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken the first article from page 1 and the second article from page 10. Now both of these articles talk about the recent 2+2 dialogue between India and the United States. So what we'll do first is revise as to what is the 2+2 dialogue, and then we'll try to understand as to what has been the new changes in Indo-US relationship. Now let us first understand as to what is the 2+2 dialogue. Now this 2+2 ministerial dialogue be held between the defense and foreign ministers of India, and while on the other side, the United States would be represented by the US Secretary of State and the US Secretary of Defense. Now the 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and the United States is different from the 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia. And this 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia is conducted between the foreign and the defense secretaries of both nations. So now hopefully you've understood the difference between the 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and the United States and how it is different from the 2+2 dialogue that India has with Japan and Australia. So now hopefully up till here you understood as to what is the 2+2 ministerial dialogue. Now let us understand as to what have been the new contours that have been agreed upon in the recent 2+2 ministerial dialogue between India and the United States. Now, the first new news that has emerged from the 2+2 dialogue is that both India and the United States would strengthen their defense ties. Under India's designation as a major defense partner, and under the recent designation of STA1 that has been given by the United States to India. Now, the STA1 designation of India by the United States would authorize India the export, re-export, and in-country transfer of specific sensitive defense technologies. And apart from this, it would also allow the export, re-export, and in-country transfer of dual-use technologies from the United States to India, wherein India has become the third country in Asia after Japan and South Korea to receive the STA1 designation from the United States. And this designation is intended to strengthen the defense ties between India and the United States. However, this designation is yet to be operationalized by the US government. The second main development during the meeting was that India and the United States signed the COMCASA Defense Agreement, wherein COMCASA is the third foundational defense agreement of the United States that has been signed between India and the US. Wherein the signing of COMCASA would facilitate the access of advanced defense systems such as equipment for encrypted communication to India, wherein it would allow access to equipment for encrypted communication. The third new aspect agreed upon during the 2+2 dialogue was that India and the United States would negotiate a new industrial security annexure, wherein this industrial security annexure would be to ensure closer cooperation and collaboration between the defense industry of both the countries. And the fourth and the last new aspect that was agreed upon during the 2+2 dialogue would be that India and the United States would hold the first ever Tri-Services Joint Exercise in 2019. Wherein the Tri-Services Joint Exercise means that the Army, the Air Force, and the Navy of both the countries would be participating together in this exercise. Now, you have to understand one aspect that this would not be India's first Tri-Services Joint Exercise, wherein India and Russia conducted what was called the Indra 2017 Tri-Services Exercise in the year 2017. However, this 2019 exercise would be the first Tri-Services exercise between India and the United States. So now hopefully you've understood the new aspects that have been agreed upon during the recent 2+2 dialogue between India and the United States, wherein both India and the United States would strengthen their defense ties, wherein India has already been designated as a major defense partner of the United States. And moreover, the United States has also given India the STA1 designation, wherein the STA1 designation would entitle India to license-free exports, re-exports, and transfer in defense items from the United States to India. However, the US government is yet to implement the STA1 designation. The second main aspect from the 2+2 dialogue was that India and the United States signed the COMCASA agreement, wherein it is now the third foundational defense agreement that has been signed between India and the United States, and it would facilitate access of advanced defense systems to India, wherein one of the major advantages of India signing COMCASA is that India would now be able to purchase equipment for encrypted communication from the United States. The third main aspect was that both the countries would negotiate an industrial security annexure, wherein this would allow for closer collaboration and cooperation between the defense industries of both the countries. And the last and the main aspect that was agreed upon during the 2+2 dialogue was that both the countries would hold their first Tri-Services Joint Exercises in 2019, wherein the Tri-Services exercise it would include Army, Air Force, and the Navy of both the countries. Now you have to understand that this would not be the first exercise that India conducts with any other country, wherein the Indra 2017 military exercise was the first Tri-Services exercise that India had, and it was conducted between India and Russia, wherein the 2+2 dialogue and the recently signed COMCASA agreement would be placed in GS Paper 2 within the section International Relations and within the subsection Bilateral Agreements involving India and affecting India's interest. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. The other news we would be analyzing from the first page would be section 377, wherein this news has been carried forward on page 11, the editorial page, page 3, and also includes the lead editorial. And we would be analyzing these news from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section Social Justice and within the subsection Protection and Betterment of Vulnerable Section. Now what has happened is a 5-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court has decriminalized homosexuality, wherein homosexuality means a sexual relationship between individuals of the same sex or the same gender. Now the Supreme Court has held that part of the section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. Now this is a fact that you should remember is that when we talk about section 377, it is part of the Indian Penal Code, and the Supreme Court has declared this as unconstitutional, wherein section 377 criminalized certain acts of private consensual sexual conduct between adults, and the section 377 was used to threaten and coerce the LGBTQ community or the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community. However, the court has also held that cases of unnatural sexual acts like bestiality or sexual acts without consent would continue to be a crime under section 377 of IPC. Now let us understand the various important aspects that have been highlighted in this judgment of the Supreme Court, wherein the first main highlight of this judgment is that sexual autonomy is a pillar of individual liberty, when the Supreme Court has observed that intimate relations is a matter of complete personal choice between the consenting adults. And moreover, according to the Supreme Court, sexual autonomy is a vital personal right and falls within the purview of private protective sphere and includes individual choice and autonomy. The second main aspect highlighted in this judgment is that the LGBTQ community has a fundamental right to live with dignity, wherein according to the Supreme Court, section 377 demeans same-sex consenting adults for their sexual orientation, wherein this judgment of the Supreme Court would now assure constitutional value of fraternity for the LGBT community. And apart from this, the Supreme Court also cited that modern psychiatric studies and legislation in various democracies recognize that gay persons and transgenders do not suffer from any form of mental disorder, and therefore sexual orientation such as homosexuality cannot be penalized. Now the third main aspect highlighted in this judgment is that according to the Supreme Court, sexual orientation of the LGBT community is intrinsic to their dignity and is at the heart of their privacy, wherein according to the Supreme Court, when section 377 was founded in colonial India, it was based on notions of morality which are against the current constitutional order. And according to the Supreme Court, the Constitution adopts a simple principle that the state or the government has no business to intrude into the personal lives of its citizens, and therefore sexual orientation forms a part of privacy. Wherein according to the Supreme Court, section 377 is provided for rule by the law and not rule of the law, wherein the Supreme Court has explained this, wherein rule of law facilitates equality, liberty and dignity for all, whereas rule by law provides for legitimacy to arbitrary state behavior, wherein you should understand the difference between rule by law and rule of law. And this conceptual understanding of their difference becomes very relevant for your mains and prelims examination. The fourth aspect highlighted in the judgment is of discrimination and social prejudice, wherein according to the Supreme Court, the LGBT community have been subjected to prejudice by the society because of being part of the sexual minority, and therefore have been discriminated against and have had violence acts committed on them on account of their sexual orientation, wherein according to the Supreme Court, section 377 made the LGBT community disadvantaged in their access to healthcare and other government facilities. And according to the Supreme Court, section 377 infringed on the fundamental right to non-discrimination and further infringed on the fundamental right to have a life of dignity and privacy as guaranteed under the Constitution of India. So now hopefully you've understood the four main aspects that have been highlighted in the judgment on section 377. Now you have to understand that articles and editorials on section 377 and this recent judgment of the Supreme Court would continue to appear in the Hindu newspaper. And hopefully with the explanation given in this section, you would understand the various important aspects that have been given in this judgment. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now an important aspect that we continue to highlight for your prelims examination is that questions which are asked under the section of the syllabus Geography of the World. Wherein this question, which was asked in the prelims of 2014 in the section Geography of the World, as to the location of Chechnya, Darfur and Swat Valley, when you have to understand that all of these regions had some current event that was of international importance because of which they were in the news. Wherein Chechnya was in the news because of the conflict between Russia and the Chechen rebels, Darfur was in the news because of the Darfur humanitarian crisis, and similarly Swat Valley in Pakistan was in the news because of the fight between Pakistan and the Taliban group. Wherein this question was asked in the prelims of 2015 as to what is the location of Golan Heights, where it is located in the Middle East between the border of Israel and Syria. Wherein this question has been asked in the prelims of 2016, wherein with regards to ethnic communities such as the Kurd, Madesi and the Rohingyas, wherein the Kurds in Iraq were in the news due to their conflict with ISIS, the community of Madesi in Nepal was in the news because of India's informal blockade of Nepal, while the Rohingya community of Myanmar were in the news due to the Rohingya refugee crisis. And in similar terms, questions were asked in the prelims of 2017 and in the prelims of 2018 on either some community, city, or town which is often mentioned in the news. And they're often mentioned in the news because some current event of international importance has happened within that town or city or with that community. And one of the important aspects that we continue to highlight on how to prepare for questions of geography of the world is to go through the world page of either the Hindu, the Indian Express, or any other paper that you subscribe to and look at the cities or towns or ethnic groups that are given in the headlines. Wherein the first city that today's newspaper mentions is of Kabul, but you already know that Kabul is a very popular city and is the capital of Afghanistan. Wherein in today's paper there are two cities in the news. First is Salisbury in the United Kingdom, and second is Idlib in Syria. Now, the city of Salisbury in UK is in the news because of the Salisbury attack, wherein it has been alleged by the United Kingdom that Russia tried to kill Sergei Skripal and his daughter using a chemical attack in the city of Salisbury, while the city of Idlib in Syria is in the news because of the continued humanitarian crisis that has gripped this city due to the conflict between Syria and ISIS. And therefore, by following this procedure, it would help you in preparing for questions that are asked on the section Geography of the World. And from today's paper, there are two cities that you should remember. First is Salisbury in UK, and second is Idlib in Syria.
And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.